Attention, everybody. The views expressed on the show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and or their affiliate and subordinate ministries and or nonprofits. Just letting you guys know that this is a rerun of the happy hour. Though the morning drive sign is up for the first few seconds of this video. So here you go. Take it away, Dr. Paul and Miss Nancy. Okay, they're still.
On radio, and obviously the best look on Facebook. If you were watching last hour, then you'd have to agree with me. This is the best look on Facebook because I hear Pam whining in the distance. I forgot she was on there. Well, last hour was a good-looking show too.
You mean your last hour?
Anyway, very quickly, a disclaimer: Acts Ministry nor Acts Media Group, any of the organization, anyone connected with it, not responsible for the contents of this broadcast. Anything that is said, any opinion expressed, or anything that we do, they're not responsible. I guess we are. Anyway, really quick, be watching. There's going to be a change coming up in the Monday show, that 9 o'clock in the morning Monday show, and I'm sure they'll keep you informed about that, but I know it'll be good. And then on Tuesday, as always, will be something to celebrate with Tom and Amber. And then on Wednesday, it's Marketplace of Humanity with the two good old boys, Sam Biggers and Steve Schultz. And that's a sneaky way of saying it's a Bible study. And it's good. And then on Thursdays, the Power Hour with Brother Ernie and his cohorts. But today is a wrap-up for the week. It is the happy hour. We are delighted to have a very special guest today, and his name is Billy Burris, Reverend Billy Burris. Welcome, Billy. We're glad you're here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Now, Billy is just a young sprout. He's younger than I am, but he's been around a while. How many years have you been an Assembly of God pastor?
About 59, 60 years.
You're a newcomer.
Yeah, I started very young.
So did I'm in my 65th year of ministry.
Okay.
So I started very young.
Yes.
Like at 5, something like that.
Paul Collins, you started real young. At the age of 9?
At the age of 9.
You knew the Lord was calling you to preach.
By the way, that's Nancy you're hearing from, my wife, my co-host. We're the only husband-wife co-hosts of a live radio/Facebook show in the world, as far as I know. And you're right. Of course, I don't count from 9 until 19.
I do.
Those 10
I do,
years.
because to me, you went 10 years with that call on your life, and you finally answered it and got saved the same day.
That's right. That's right. 10 years later, when I was when I was 19. So
That's right.
we can put another 10 years on my 64 that I've completed. Say I've completed 74, and I'm in my 75th year. You know, that's getting close to a century. Might as well go for it.
Yeah, that's like you took, man, I'll be 74 at the end of September. My goodness, and you've been at 74, and of course, you're 10 years older than I am.
Well, really. Your math is good. So's your arithmetic. We don't want to forget we have Billy here. Billy,
I know.
Billy, for years you were here in Springfield. Now, for those in the international audience, Springfield, Missouri is in the southwest corner of the state of Missouri, right in the heart of the United States of America, and that's where we're broadcasting from live. And Brother Billy Burris was pastor of a great Assembly of God church here many years. How many years, Billy?
I was there 23 and a half years, maybe 23 and 3/4.
Were you there when they moved from the old location to the new one?
I was not. When they moved from East Side to North Glenstone, they changed the name to Praise Assembly then.
Mm-hmm.
I was not there at that time. I came in 84.
I can't remember who was there. Nancy and I attended East Side one time because they had a man and woman married couple who were part of the old PTL Club singers who were there to sing.
Okay.
And
Yeah. my predecessor, his name was Bob Smith.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I seem to
Fine
recall
man.
that.
Yeah.
Now you, even though you retired from up at Praise, you're still ministering though.
Yes, I stepped aside in 2007, September the 30th, which was my birthday. I stepped aside that day, and anyway, I wasn't very happy not preaching. I almost drove my wife nuts, you know, and she was praying that I would find a place to preach. You know, there were many boys that came to Central Bible College and Evangel University when I was pastor there that said, you know, if you ever retire and we're out pastoring, we want you to come to our church. And I said, I'd be happy to do that. But they all forgot that for some reason.
How
You
soon
know,
they forget.
how soon they forget. So, you know, I wasn't getting any invitations to preach in this little church in Branson. Then in 2011, they called me for interim. And I went down there and interviewed, talked to them. It's an independent church. It's an unusual mix, which there's really only one church.
That's right.
That's right.
And no matter what the name is on the door. And
Right.
it was a General Baptist church that owned this building, and they didn't have a pastor. And there was a independent Christian church that had a pastor but no building. So those two congregations merged, and then I come in here as a Pentecostal. So we've got a great mixture.
Well, that sounds like Acts ministry.
It is. That's I identify with that. And anyway, that was in 2011, and I told them I would be there for 60 days, and I'm still there.
It shows that you could fit in. Acts ministry works across denominational lines.
I realize that. That's the reason
and
I
the,
believe in what you're doing.
The mission statement has always been unity in Christ through the Holy Spirit.
Right.
I find this interesting now. For those of you, again, in the international audience, Branson, Missouri is south of Springfield, and the water boy just arrived.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Matt. That's Matt Pearson, station manager,
Thanks, man.
and our engineer today. Anyway, Branson is just south of Springfield, about 35 or 40 miles,
Yeah.
and they have a lot of tourism there. So how does that tourism base fit in with that congregation? Do you ever see any tourists? Or
Oh, yes. Periodically, we have people that come in because they're there on vacation or there for a few days to see the shows and do the things that are there. And they stop by, and we always welcome them. And, of course, it affects our congregation in some ways that people work that are part of the congregation.
Right.
And so they have to work on Sunday some. But anyway, it's a good mix.
did you know, I'm sure you do, the audience probably doesn't know, that the General Baptist and the Free Will Baptist are both really just Methodists who immerse
Yeah.
people in baptism,
Right.
because they're both what we call Arminian in their
Yes.
taproot theology.
Yes.
So you could go into a General Baptist church, and if you were Methodist, and feel very much at home, if
Right.
you were an old-time Methodist.
Right.
And Independent Christian Church, I find them interesting because the disciples of Christ came into being with a Presbyterian pastor and a Baptist pastor. They were going to build a tent big enough to hold everybody be united. First thing they did was they had a little division over whether or not to have musical instruments in the church, and those became the Church of Christ. And then they had some that decided that baptism by immersion was a necessity, and so you had what we call baptismal regeneration that came along. So you had the Independent Christian Church.
Right.
This is an anomaly, Billy.
Yeah.
I mean, you are old line traditional Pentecostal. You've been pastor now of many years of a church that's General Baptist and Independent Christian. Wow.
Yeah.
What's one of your services like?
Well, they're very good. They're kind of like going through a door back to the 70s or 60s, you know, and with our part of our worship. But anyway, it's all good, and we still sing out of hymnals,
Oh, yeah.
and it's a good mix. But I love the General Baptist. They're fine people, and I love the Independent Christian. And you know, of course, I guess the prominent one out of that group was Cecil Todd.
Oh, yes.
And Cecil had quite a bearing on the United States with the revival
Right.
fires.
Yes, he did.
Actually, one of the brothers, you remember the two twins that used to sing
Yes.
on that? Their last name was Good.
Yeah, the Good Twins.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, one of the Good twins attends our church.
Wow.
And, yeah, he's the guy that'll greet you first, probably, if you come in.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, it's just a good mixture, and we've got people of other denominations now, and it's
Where is the building
the
located?
building is at College and Fifth Streets. As you're going down into Old Town on 76,
Mm-hmm.
there's a large Presbyterian church
Yes.
on the south side.
Right.
And if you turn right through the parking lot of that Presbyterian church, which is on both sides of that street,
Right.
it come 2 blocks. We're on the corner on the right
I see.
at
Okay.
College and Fifths.
And you drive down on Sundays and on Wednesday nights,
I
right?
do. We had a condo in Branson for a while, and anyway, we never did sell our home up here, so we came back up here eventually.
Very interesting, to say the least. We have this little congregation where I'm the pastor here in Springfield called First Acts Church, and we are representative of an organization that I'm trying to get together to be supportive of Acts Ministry, because Acts Ministry doesn't have the kind of broad financial support that, for instance, some televangelist has and all those.
Right.
And Acts Ministry is a very well kept secret, even though it's reaching millions of people every month in this country alone, let alone millions around the world. And so finances are becoming, as this expands electronically and so forth with the internet, the finances become more challenging. And people can go online and hit the donate button, and they can give directly to Acts Ministry. Or, Billy, there's a section of the website, and it's actsmediagroup.com, by the way, actsmediagroup.com. But there's a portion of the website where they not only can get Acts Radio 24/7,
Right.
wonderful, wonderful programming. In fact, we're live now on Acts Radio,
Right.
as well as simulcast on Facebook. They can get some of the old archive shows. They can read articles in the Real News Review, which used to be a hard copy paper. Now it's online, well received. They can find natural products for to contribute to good health,
Right.
and called the Natural Solutions Store, and that's naturalsolutionstore.bz. This is a really big operation to be a very small budget. A lot of work with veterans, a lot of work with the parents of autistic children,
Right.
a lot of work with handicapped people of all kinds. So I'm trying to find a way to energize especially a lot of the independent churches and ministers and ministries to funnel support into Acts Ministry
Right.
as a united effort, because otherwise, as you probably know even better than I do, many, many, many little independent churches, they have 4 or 5 missionaries, maybe they send them $25 a month each and so forth, and that's all right. But in order to make the impact that we need to make, we've got to have another type of outreach, and Acts Ministry is it.
Right.
There's nobody else in the marketplace. Anyway, having said that, one of the reasons why it's so important for us to maintain what you're doing, what we do with First Acts Church, 2 Sunday afternoons a month in Springfield, first and third Sundays.
Right.
I'll give a little commercial for First Acts Church. I like to do it in terms that people locally can understand, in the words of some of the local merchants and how they advertise. For instance, there's a guy here that inspired me with his commercial, and I say, we're a really little church, but with a really big fellowship.
That's good.
You'll you'll like the way we do ministry. Tell a friend. Does that sound familiar? Or how about one of the car dealers, one that he's now deceased? He used to say, he'd end his commercial and he'd say, "That's it."
Yes.
Remember that?
I remember him.
And so when I tell you, First Acts Church is open at 2:00 on first and third Sunday afternoons, that's it.
Yep. That's great.
Where?
Huh?
Where?
We meet in the chapel at Maranatha Village on Norton Road, which
Right.
is east of the fairgrounds, east of the Dickerson Park Zoo, east of what used to be Central Bible College. And we rent their chapel, and we have for over 20 years
Wow.
on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
Thanks for reminding me when, Nancy. Now, the other commercial is, I could say, First Acts Church, Springfield, Missouri. What a place. Remember
Yeah.
that guy?
Yeah, I remember that too.
Or, and then I'd wind up by saying, when it comes to church and fellowship and teaching, nobody beats our deal.
There you
Remember
go.
that commercial?
I remember that. You had a finger pointed at you when they said that.
That's right. They point their finger at you. For those on Facebook, it looks like that. For those on radio, you have to use your imagination. Billy Weir, you also have a radio background.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, I pastored in Green Forest, Arkansas for 23 and a half years. I don't know what's about that number, 23 and a half years. But anyway, I pastored there 23 and a half years. I went there in 61 and pastored until 84 when I came here. I really thought I was a one-church pastor, and I was happy to be. Green Forest, when we went there, was a town of 1,200, and they had just gotten the award as an all-American city. It
Oh,
was
yes.
the most beautiful little town that you ever saw, and wonderful people. But my predecessors in that church, at least 3 of them, and I think maybe 5 of them, had stayed a year or less. And, that hurts a church.
Yes, it
When
does.
there's no longevity.
That's
They
right.
can't really know their pastor.
That's right.
And I really don't believe in all this turning a resume into the bigger church. I wasn't looking for a bigger church. I just wanted to be in the center of God's will.
There
That's
you go.
right.
That's what I
right.
wanted, and I was, and God blessed that 23 years down there.
Wonderful. Green
And
Forest is a neat little town.
It's a neat little town. It's a great town. It's quite different as all the difference in the world now, because of every place is different because of our culture changing
Sure.
so much. But anyway, I approached the radio station over in Berryville
Yes.
about a Sunday morning time when I played gospel music via record. That's back in the days of
Yes.
the old 33 and a third albums. You
I
know.
remember.
Yeah.
And and I didn't want it to be just about my church. I wanted to advertise for any church in the area. If they were having special meetings, if they were having special guests, they let me know. I would plug their services. You know.
Sure.
And I did that for 17 or 18 years. And I would kind of sign on at the radio station and go until 9 o'clock and just try to get people to go to church. I would always say there's many churches across our land and country whose doors will be opening in just a few minutes.
Yes.
And they invite you to come. And I challenge you, please go to church today.
We have a little bit in common about Green Forest and Berryville. We still have a couch in our living room that we bought in a used furniture store in Berryville,
Okay.
and they delivered it to our home in Springfield,
Wow.
and we still have it in our living room.
Yeah.
Also, Green Forest, that's the last place where we went to attend a concert by the Blackwood Brothers Quartet.
Okay.
And it was probably, I think it was the Assembly of God Church.
Uh-huh.
R.W. Blackwood had been with the quartet just a short time at that time. And of course, now he and his wife Donna and their daughter, they have a show in Branson they have had for quite some time. But
Right.
but R.W. Blackwood and I went back to 1965 when I was pastor up in North Missouri. I had him and his little group at that time when he was just a kid.
Right.
But I always think about Green Forest and associated with the Blackwoods.
Uh-huh.
Now, Billy, you are currently still doing a little something with radio, are you not?
Well, I'm what's called a country parson on Believers Bluegrass, which is a bluegrass show that plays only religious bluegrass.
Uh-huh.
And we're on about 26 stations across the southeast.
Whoa.
The only one here is KWFC.
Uh-huh.
We were on KWFC Saturday and Sunday. Now, for whatever reason, we're just on Sunday
Mm-hmm.
from 4 to 5.
Where do you do the broadcast from?
One more time.
Where do you record the broadcast?
One of the men that originated the show, Mark Withers, he has a little studio of his own,
And it's
and
where?
he puts it. And they give me 1 minute. That's all I have on it is 1 minute
Mm-hmm.
to do a devotional. But I tell you, it's hard to do a 1 minute sermon. It's much it's much easier to do a 20-minute or a 30-minute
30 minutes,
or
yeah.
sometime an hour sermon with me. You know, if my wife's not there to shake her head at me or look at her watch, you know, I don't know when to stop.
But when she starts hitting it,
Oh,
like
yeah.
maybe a stop.
Or shaking it and put it in her ear. But anyway, they give me that 1 minute, and they let me run over, you know, if I do. So I record about a month or 2 months
I see,
at a
okay.
time, and they splice it into the show. But it's an excellent show if you like bluegrass type music, and it's on KWFC at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon.
Nancy's a fan of bluegrass music. I was never a real fan of bluegrass, although many years ago I helped produce a one-time bluegrass television show. And I say one time because we intended for it to be all the time, but it made it up on satellite when satellite TV was still really new. We got it up one time,
Okay.
and it was recorded here in Springfield in the Springfield Art Museum auditorium.
All right.
And that was an adventure, to say the least.
Yep.
But you're the country parson.
Yeah.
Billy, what you, whenever I've talked to anybody about Billy Burris, if they sat in your congregation very much, they like to tell about how often you would step from one side of the pulpit off to one side and say, after you stepped over there, you'd lean forward and say, "Can we just talk?"
Yep. Yeah.
That became almost a trademark with you.
Yeah, it did. When I stepped aside in '07, they had the 7 deacons to come up, and there were 7 statements that I was known to make in about every sermon, and they made fun of that. And of course, it was a good time.
Sure.
And, but anyway, I would. They talked about how many times I closed. I would say, and in closing, at least 3 times. And I said, well, I just love to close. I love to do that.
There,
you know.
right. No, that's the
But-
best part is the close.
Yeah. But anyway, another one that I was known for was saying fasten your seatbelts,
Ah,
because I was going to say something that I thought was shake them up a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
most of the time it didn't.
there was one of the guys that was connected with Acts Ministry. He was in Texas,
Uh-huh.
still is, as far as I know, and he's an older guy, but he had developed quite a prison ministry because he was an old NASCAR driver,
Okay.
and they had given him one of the cars that had won the Daytona 500. I did not know that when a car wins the Daytona 500, they retire that car.
Right.
So he had one of those. Then he had the car that was in the movie Talladega Nights. He had 2 of them, and he'd put those on a trailer, and he'd go into prison exercise yards, and the inmates would come out to look them over, and he'd preach to them.
Yeah.
And this old boy was very gifted. He also flew his own airplane.
Okay.
He without anybody's permission, he'd fly into Mexico and land, and he and his buddy, who had a nickname that reminded me of the guy on NCIS, the autopsy guy, called him Ducky. Anyway, he had his cars on display at a tent meeting I was doing in Texas. And I looked inside, and here was a sign that said, "Get in, sit down, hold on, and shut up."
That's good.
Anyway, Billy, there are some things happening right now in our world that if two old preachers can't address it, I guess they're not addressable. We're having a lot of discussion continue. In fact, even as late as this morning on the news about the folks that no longer are calling themselves pro-choice. They're openly calling themselves pro-abortion, even to the extent of right up at the moment of birth to take the life of a baby. And one of the governors of one of the major states on the East Coast, who happens to be a medical doctor, said that even if there was a botched abortion, it would be up to the doctor and the mother to decide whether to kill the baby or try to save it. That sounds to me like infanticide.
Yes.
And for those of you who may not be familiar with the term, it is I-N-F-A-N, infant, I-N-F-A-N-T, in infanticide, killing of babies, which they did back in the Old Testament days, and it brought great wrath of God upon them.
Right. It did.
And here our nation now is openly debating this topic.
Right.
I'm thinking, as an older guy, that one of these days they may have some serious discussions about euthanasia
Yes.
for older people. Now, this may sound like, Collins is not a conspiracy theorist by any means. I'm just telling you what's on my heart.
Right.
This morning, when I was getting ready to come here, I thought, I'm still doing some things that contribute to society.
Right.
I preach twice a month. I do a lot of consulting. I did some consulting with a young man yesterday about a major prayer movement that he's helping with, and then doing this radio and Facebook show. So I'm still making a contribution.
Right.
But there are those who think that when you are no longer able to make a contribution to society, you need to be eliminated.
Right.
When that becomes openly discussed,
Yes.
that's going to be a very serious time in the history of this nation.
Well, it's very scary to me, the things that are happening. And when it's so brazen and so bold that, just to say pro-choice is not sufficient, pro-abortion. And they, any way you determine it, I believe that the baby is a child from conception.
I do too.
And, it hurts me. The most innocent, I don't know, I just think about it this way. The most innocent of the human beings is that baby in its mother's womb. It's defenseless.
That's right.
It cannot fend for itself. And to go in there and remove it, and sometimes, I don't want to get too graphic about that, but you can get really graphic about it.
Yes, you can.
When you think about the actual situation and the actual event itself.
Well, in the midst of all of this that's going on, I find it interesting that I think yesterday was the National Day of Prayer,
Yes.
and it received very little attention. But historically, listen to this, President Reagan he's quoted. He said, in 1775, the Continental Congress proclaimed the first National Day of Prayer. That was before we became the United States.
Right.
In 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially ended the long, weary Revolutionary War, during which a National Day of Prayer had been proclaimed every spring for 8 years. President Washington, after the Whiskey Rebellion in western Pennsylvania, declared a National Day of Prayer January the 1st, 1796. And here's what he said. These men were so eloquent. All persons within the United States to render sincere and hearty thanks to the great ruler of nations for the possession of constitutions of government, and fervently beseech the kind author of these blessings to establish habits of sobriety, order, and morality and piety.
Right.
And then President John Adams, who I like to claim is in my ancestry,
Okay.
my mother was an Adams, he declared a National Day of Prayer and Fasting March the 23rd, 1798, and again March the 6th, 1799. And here's what he said. As the people of the United States are still held in jeopardy by insidious acts of a foreign nation, I hereby recommend a day of solemn humiliation, fasting, and prayer, that the citizens call to mind our numerous offenses against the Most High God, confess them before him with the sincerest penitence, implore his pardoning mercy through the great mediator and redeemer for our past transgressions. He went on to say, and that through the grace of his Holy Spirit we may be disposed and enabled to yield a more suitable obedience to his righteous requisitions. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people.
Yes.
I have 3 or 4 sheets going back into the history of this country
Right.
concerning the National Day of Prayer,
Right.
which basically received no recognition yesterday. They
Right.
barely gave it any attention. That was on a conservative network. And by the way, one of the liberal networks, their viewership is plummeting so low that they are predicting the demise of that network. So if you go on ignoring God and don't give thanks and
That's
know
right.
where you are in the scheme of things, your life's going to change.
Yes, that's right.
This past Tuesday, Nancy and I made a trip 2 hours away to handle a funeral, which was a little different. It was from 5 in the evening until 7. From 5 to 6:30 was visitation. 6:30 to 7, they gave the floor to me. The funeral was for a lady who was an old friend of mine, and she had passed as a result of cancer. And I'm pleased to report that even though the cancer was discovered not long before she died, she received excellent medical care in an outstate hospital in America. And so we have all this stuff about medical care and older people and value of life. Her life was valuable to the very end, because at the very end she made it a point to take care of the only grandson. She had several grandchildren, one grandson whom she had provided a home for and was helping him get a college education. At the very end, she took care of her will and saw to it that that grandson would have a home and everything he needed. Now that's a victory story
Yes.
about medical care and about a woman with the right kind of heart.
Right.
And nobody had any business trying to take her out of the way
Right.
ahead of time.
Right.
That was God's business
Yes.
when he wanted to take her home.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other things, Billy, that is reserved to have when you were here, I did touch on this one other time with one of our guests, but for instance, I look in my little handy-dandy calendar here, and I see that Sunday is a special observance for a major portion of our population now, Cinco de Mayo. Our Hispanic friends, Mexicans, they observe Cinco de Mayo, which celebrates a victory over the French, I think, in their history. Um, Sunday, September the 12th, Mother's Day.
Right.
How about that?
Yes.
Don't ever want to forget to honor
Right.
mothers.
I had a wonderful mother.
I miss my mom to this day, and she's been dead close to 60 years.
Yeah.
But one time I was preaching at a little country church, 35 minutes or so from here, and I started to preach, and it was Mother's Day, I think, and I almost wept. I said, I miss my mama. I don't think a man ever gets too old to miss his
right.
mama.
That's exactly right.
For those of us in your church or my church or Acts Ministry or wherever you are, your connection, if you have a mother who's alive,
Right.
honor your mother.
Yes.
May
that's
the 12th.
True.
And let's see.
My mother was actually the visionary of the two. I had a wonderful mother and a wonderful father. My father was 50 years old when I was born. My mother was his second wife. His first wife passed away. They had 3 daughters, and she passed away when the youngest daughter was 18 months old.
I see.
And he lived as a single parent for 3 years. Met my mother, and she was quite a lot younger than him. And I was the only child of that marriage. And it didn't happen until 10 years after they married. So I actually had 4 mothers, those 3 sisters,
Right.
you know.
Oh, sure.
I had 4 mothers.
You didn't have a chance.
Which I didn't, you know. And they said I was spoiled, but I wasn't
Oh,
spoiled. You know, not at
of
all.
course not. Anybody that will step to one side of the pulpit and
Yeah.
say, can we just talk? He's spoiled.
Anyway, my mom was a visionary, and my dad was a wonderful man. He was a barber, and he didn't make a lot of money. I remember when the haircuts was 50 cents and shaves were a quarter.
Hmm.
I could never understand that. Can you imagine shaves being cheaper than a haircut because they're taking the chance they're going to take that guy's life with
Yeah,
that,
I know.
with that straight razor on their face? But anyway, he didn't make a lot of money, but my mom saw that I had piano lessons. We lived on acreage in town in Russellville, Arkansas, down in the river valley.
Oh, sure.
And anyway, she milked a Jersey cow. We had the cow for our milk and chickens for our eggs, and we raised a pork or two.
Hmm.
But anyway, she sold whatever milk and butter we had left over that we didn't need to pay for my piano lessons. And I will be forever, eternally grateful for her.
I can imagine, yes.
When I would tell that before her, she didn't like for me to tell that for some reason. She didn't want to.
She didn't want to be a martyr.
Right.
She just
But
wanted to be a mother.
Yeah.
That's all.
But anyway, I had a wonderful mother, and it's good to celebrate them while you've got them, I tell you.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
We have another occasion coming up in this month of May, and it is on Saturday, the 18th of May, Armed Forces Day.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I am pleased that in recent years, people have begun the process of saying to military people, thank you for your service,
Right.
and to those who had formerly been in the military. I think that's a good thing to
It is.
recognize that. We have Armed Forces Day coming up on Saturday, the 18th, and that ought to be a day when we are particularly aware of the men and women in uniform.
Yes.
Here's one that I didn't know existed. I have no idea what it is. Monday, May the 20th is Victoria Day, but it's only in California. Why they put it in this little daily reminder, I don't know. I have no idea what Victoria Day is in California. But I do know that there's one more very important one in May. Billy, you're old enough that when Monday, May the 27th comes around, you may call that Decoration Day.
Yeah.
But they've since renamed it Memorial Day.
Right.
But when I was a youngster and you were a youngster, it was Decoration Day.
Yes, sir.
And I'm wondering how many people in our viewing audience remember that it was Decoration Day. I'm
Right.
going to ask Shirley Simpson in St. Joe, do you remember when it was Decoration Day? Jerry Chambers over in Chesterfield, Missouri, just suburb of St. Louis. Do you remember when it was Decoration Day? Janie Wood up in northeast Missouri in Shelbina. Do you remember it being called Decoration Day? And here's one that is the home run. This is the grand slam. Mary Rorts in Jacksonville, Florida. Do you remember when it was called Decoration Day? Now that touches on a few of our watchers.
Yeah.
And all of the fans of Billy Burris that I saw your text that you're watching. How many of you remember it as Decoration Day? And also be sure and contact us. There should be some contact information along the bottom of the screen, and let us know that you have been with us, or you are with us, or you're going to be with us. And stay in touch, because every Friday the happy hour will have something happy to say to you. Now, I'm only going to point out one really important date in the month of June. Now, we know that Father's Day is in there, but there's another very important date. June the 5th falls on a Wednesday.
Yes. Yes.
Birthday of someone who is not very illustrious nor well known,
That's right.
but my birthday is June the 5th.
Oh, wow. Okay.
On a Wednesday. And interestingly enough, I think that I was actually born on a Wednesday, and I came into this world at about 10:15 in the morning, which is about the same hour of the day that my oldest child was born many years later.
Okay.
So anyway, stay tuned, June the 5th. Birthday for Paul Collins. Like Jack Benny, he'll be 39 again and again and again. Well, we getting close to being out of time. We have a couple of minutes here. Billy, if someone wanted to attend your church down there in Branson, give us the address again and tell us what time.
It's actually 501 West College,
Okay.
which is a corner of College and Fifth Street. It's across the street from where the Branson High School was.
Oh, I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. And our morning service begins at 10:30.
All right.
We have an adult Sunday school class at 9:30, and then our morning service begins at 10:30, and then our Wednesday night is a Bible study at 6:30.
All right. Well, you heard it here from Billy Burris.
Yes,
pastor.
we'd be happy to have anyone.
Oh, I know you would. And folks, you're in for a treat if you will hear Billy Burris bring a message, because he'll probably close 3 times,
Yep, probably do.
and each close will be good. Nancy, in 30 seconds, what would you like to say to our folks before I put the close on this? Well, we've got longer than I thought. The clock on the wall
Yeah.
is giving us more time than I thought. So take a minute.
Sure. Oh, this is really off the wall. It was just something that came to me in the night, and all I remember when I woke up was that song, "His Eye is on the Sparrow," and I know He watches me.
Mm-hmm.
That's big. If everybody would think about that, they would feel more good or better, as I say.
Well, that's the way we felt coming back from Camdenton, Missouri, on Tuesday with the tornadoes in the air, and
Wow.
we came through Lebanon just ahead of the tornado that came through.
I know, but Paul Collins, and I'm not taking any kind of credit, but when people pray, good things happen, and that's the reason why we made it to Camdenton. That's the reason why we made it back home with the way the weather was. And yeah, we had rain, and yes, there was a bare hair bit of wind, but it wasn't anything like it could have been.
That's
and
right.
it's all because of Jesus.
Amen.
Yes, 10 minutes.
Can you not see the clock? Can you see it okay?
Yeah, I see it now. Yesterday, Nancy went out in the yard to work, and we had this big limb that had been laying in our backyard for several weeks, that just from big old tree out in the front yard of old age. It dropped dropped a big limb. And my little electric chainsaw was dull, and I couldn't cut it up. So it's just been laying there for several weeks. Yesterday, Nancy was out in the backyard working, and I didn't know what she was doing other than mowing the yard. But pretty soon she called me out there to show me she had moved this big log
Wow.
way off to one side, and she was praising God because when she tried to move it, it was too heavy, and she prayed and asked Jesus for help, and it was lightweight, and she moved it.
Good.
That's a sight.
So, this is still, a faith-based broadcast, and we
yeah.
like to point out the good things that God does.
Amen.
God has blessed us with some wonderful guests in the recent weeks. We had a lady lawyer one day. We had a lady real estate agent one day. We had Francine Pratt, who's a community activist here, beautiful lady. We had Mark Dixon, who's a community activist. We had Lyle Foster, proprietor of Big Mama's coffee shop and
Espresso.
Espresso up on Commercial Street, and
Right.
also professor over at Missouri State University. And we had two ladies from CARE Medical, K-A-R-E, here. One of them a nurse practitioner. Today we have Billy Burris. Coming up, we will have on May the 10th, Dan Prater. Now, Dan, for a long time, was with Drury University here and headed up a study about nonprofits and a lot of good workshops on that. He is now with the largest accounting firm here in town, and his specialty is how they deal with nonprofits. And Dan will be here on May the 10th, and we'll find out more what he's currently doing and how relevant this is. Folks, most of you are connected to a nonprofit one way or another.
Right.
If you go to church, you're connected. And then also, on May the 17th, we will have a lady who has a private practice in counseling. She's a licensed professional counselor. She lives in Rogersville, which is east of Springfield, but she has an office in Springfield. But in Rogersville, she also has horses that she works with equine therapy. And so she does a lot of therapeutic work utilizing horseback riding. And then on May the 24th, if we can get the date nailed down definitely, I think it is, we'll have Samuel Knox, a very enterprising young man
Right.
who has been publishing now for many years a news magazine directed toward the black community, and it's called Unite. And Sam Knox plays piano for his dad's church, which is a large, predominantly African-American church here in town. And and Sam's a great promoter. He puts on a deal that used to be at University Plaza. Now they've had it out at the Oasis, where he brings in dance troupes from different parts of the world, and they have all kinds of people with exhibits and attracts thousands of people. Does a good job. So that's what's coming up in the future. In the meantime, I have some more news tidbits here that we can comment on.
Okay.
The International Court has ruled that, and he puts in quote marks, female athletes with high testosterone can be required to take suppressors to suppress their testosterone, because these are transgender. These are men who say they are women and competing in women's sports. There's a trans woman who smashed 4 female weightlifting records at one event. So they're beginning to take notice of the fact that just because these guys say they're not men, they're women, that
Yeah.
they have an unfair advantage.
A little confused.
More ways than one.
And then Brian Williams, a newscaster, he used to be with NBC, lost that position. He became a news person on MSNBC. He's pushing the conspiracy theory. He says that Robert Mueller, the special counsel, was not correct in finding that there was no collusion between President Trump and the Russians. Can you imagine? Here we've got this news guy who claimed a lot of stuff that, been in battle and all kinds of things that wasn't true, cost him his job. He's going to tell us that Robert Mueller, who had been the head of the FBI and a great lawyer and all that, that he's not correct in saying that there was no collusion. They just won't give up. I wish they would. I'd like for the news media to get off the topic, and I'd like for Congress to go back to work.
Yeah.
We're paying those rascals. I mentioned earlier that one of the major liberal news outlets, their audience has fallen again by another 25%. Now here's another celebrity that I know you can hardly wait to get her opinion. Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi, I hope you're Jim Whining does tell me that there's a celebrity that watches, and so I hope this celebrity tells Whoopi, celebrity to celebrity. Whoopi said there's a coup happening because Attorney General Barr was lying for Trump. So she says there's going to be a coup.
Oh.
Well, the United States hasn't been accustomed to having coups. Julia Roberts, another celebrity, wishes every school bathroom was gender neutral. In other words,
So crazy. That's crazy to me.
Matt Pearson, young man, I hear him in the distance saying, "That's crazy." When you can get a young man to say it's crazy, it must really be crazy. Julia Roberts, Pretty Woman, remember that movie? Wishes every school bathroom was gender neutral. Then this one is kind of interesting because he's on the right side, I think. Rascal Flatts, I think that was a musical group. Is that right, Matt?
It's a country.
Rascal Flatts co-founder Jay DeMarcus said, and I quote, "Without Christian roots, America sinks into darkness."
Right.
Good for Rascal Flatts.
Yeah.
Finally, in Sweden, a migrant who sexually assaulted 11 women in 2 weeks was not deported by Sweden. It's a different world. All right, we have 1 minute, and so a real quick wrap-up. Billy, thank you for being here.
Thank you for letting me come.
We've got to have you back because I know you are a wealth of stories. You've got to have a deep well to draw fresh water from. We'd love to have you back. We'll see that it
I would
happens.
love to come back.
And Nancy, as always, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Nancy takes great delight in experiencing the presence of Holy Spirit, as I do, and as I know
Amen.
Billy does, and Matthew, and Jim and Pam Whining. We are appreciators of the Holy Spirit. Now it's time for my traditional slow close. Are you ready? Here we go. This has been Paul Collins, along with my co-host Nancy and our special guest Billy Burris. You have been listening to and or watching The Happy Hour, friendliest show on radio and the best look on Facebook. And we'll be here again next Friday. See you.